We all make art and tell stories for 100 different reasons. You know that as well as I do. And one of those reasons is resistance. Stories have been an act of resistance forever. We resist bias and oppression by telling our stories, by creating art that reflects our lives and our experiences. And another thing that you know as well as I do is that there always has to be a scapegoat. Some group of people that can serve as a distraction. Right now in the US and the UK where I live, that scapegoat is the transgender community. A tiny minority of people who are having their rights stripped away from them, while an entirely different minority group, rich and powerful people, make everything worse for everyone else. And as they do that, they point and they say, yeah, but look at that trans person. And you go, oh yeah, no, I don't like those. It works. Somehow, it keeps working. And as a member of the trans community, I am upset and angry every single day. My resting heart rate is like 120. And one of the ways that we continue to not only resist, but to celebrate ourselves, our community, our lives, our history, is by making good art. And if you want to show your support for the trans community, one thing you can do is read and enjoy the art made by trans people. But of course, that's not the only reason you should do it, because that kind of sounds like pity. You should also read the books written by trans people because they're really good books. Across all genres of fiction, transgender writers are putting out some of the best stories that have been written in the past decade, and I'm going to prove it right now. Here are 10 incredible books by 10 incredible writers who are all transgender. And you should be reading every single one of these books to truly understand, appreciate, and enjoy the beauty of trans literature. Why don't we start with a book that I myself just read? Stag Dance by Tori Peters. Tori Peters made waves a few years ago with her debut novel Detransition Baby, which I've got on the shelf just here. Detransition Baby was listed for the Women's Prize here in the UK. I read it around that time and it really is a wonderful novel. And now we have Stag Dance, a collection of 4 stories, although the title story, Stag Dance, is more like a novella. This is a 300-page book, and Stag Dance makes up half of that. The other half is made up of the other 3 stories that are about 50 pages apiece. And these stories are really fascinating. Something you'll notice once you finish reading it, and this isn't a spoiler, is that every single story is written in the first person. These are very intimate stories about 4 very different people living in very different times and places. The first story is called Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, and it's kind of a post-apocalyptic story. We move back and forth between a few years after a world-changing pandemic, a few months prior to the pandemic, and the day of infection, the day it all began. And as it transpires, this pandemic, this world-ending thing, was started by the ex-girlfriend of our protagonist. And what is this infection exactly? Well, it's something that was cooked up by Australian scientists to give to pigs. Upon injection, it stops the body's ability to naturally create hormones. And so the post-apocalyptic landscape that everyone lives in this book is one where every single person has to take hormones. Why did this happen? How did this happen? What is the point of it? Well, to tell you much more would be to spoil it. The second story, The Chaser, takes place in a boys' boarding school. Our protagonist is a teenage boy who's sharing a room with another boy, and after they've been living together for a while, they occasionally enjoy each other's bodies and company. The boy that our protagonist is rooming with is very obviously an egg, or a closet trans woman. This is something that's never said in the story, but it is the entire point of it. And this story escalates in a pretty stressful way. As we move location from the grounds of the school itself to a farm, the relationship between these 2 teenagers is nail-bitingly stressful. It's a wonderful drama, and it's one of the rare short stories that transported me in the way that a huge novel can. It put me in an entirely different headspace. The third story is the titular Stag Dance, and it's a big, beefy story. It's set sometime in the past. It's an era that I am not familiar with at all, but our protagonist is part of an illegal logging operation. There are gang of lumberjacks in a forest, cutting down trees and doing it all without any kind of license or permit. They've been out there for ages, and one day one of them suggests putting on a kind of dance. But there's this tradition that some people do, where if you're interested in dressing up as a woman for the dance and being courted by one of the men, you wear this little brown triangle over your crotch that is supposed to represent, you know what it's supposed to represent. And most of the story is about our protagonist and another man who are both interested in being the woman at the dance, but because this story is really long, they go on adventures, they get in trouble, you meet new characters, there is a lot to unpack here. All while this stag dance kind of looms on the horizon. It's fascinating. And Tori Peters writes it in this incredibly macho, uniquely old American way. The language in this story is fascinating and so powerful. Some writers have a voice that they carry throughout all of their stories. You always know it's them. In this particular story, this isn't Tori Peters. This is some guy from like 1930s USA. I don't know how she did it, but it's an amazing voice that she managed to find. And the final story is called The Masker. It's set in Las Vegas, and our protagonist is kind of caught in a tug of war between an older trans woman and a younger crossdresser. This is a Vegas party where half the people are trans women and the other half are crossdressers who see dressing up as a woman as kind of a kink. And our protagonist is a young trans woman trying to figure herself out. And so she's pulled back and forth between these two characters. And the story examines what exactly it means to have one body and change into another, whether permanently or temporarily. It's so interesting. It reads like a crisis, and that really instilled in me a sense of anxiety, but that was really interesting in and of itself. Next up is a horror novel, and I'll be honest with you right now, half the books on this list are horror because, hell, I love horror. I write horror myself. And trans people are really good at writing some of the best horror fiction coming out right now. I swear, half the horror I read is trans, not just because I'm trans and I love trans fiction, but because trans people just keep putting out good horror fiction. Case in point, Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. Andrew Joseph White is an American trans man. He is really young, and he's already put out 3 incredible young adult horror novels, and he has a 4th adult horror novel coming out later this year. His other 2 books are just here, and his most famous and successful one was his first novel, Hell Followed With Us, but in my opinion, he only gets better. Everyone talks about Hell Followed With Us, but his second book, The Spirit Bares Its Teeth, is better, and Compound Fracture is better than that. He just gets better. Compound Fracture is a wonderfully clever book, and while it is about the trans experience, it's about a lot of other things as well. Our protagonist is a trans teenager. He's getting ready to come out to his parents. He's a working class kid from a small town in Virginia. He's also autistic, and he has a great reverence for one of his ancestors from the turn of the 20th century. A socialist unionist miner who was one of the last people in their town to be executed. Ever since that execution, there has been a kind of feud between our protagonist's family and a family of class traitors who all grow up to be coppers. And as I said, although this book is very much a transgender story by a transgender writer, it's also about class struggle, about abandoned and forgotten towns, working class people struggling with each other and entering into aggressive, self-destructive behavior. Miles so admires the strength and the conviction that his great-grandfather died with. He feels as though he has inherited that legacy, and his town has not moved on. It continues to be a desperately poor place, with so much unemployment, and so many people who are suffering and turning on each other as a result. And early in the novel, Miles is beaten to a pulp by the son of the sheriff. This feud just continues through the generations, and Miles wants to break it. He wants to do his great-grandfather proud, and he also starts to see the ghost of his great-grandfather. This is absolutely classified as a horror novel, but it's more a novel of brutality, and it's one of the most politically savvy books I have ever read. I don't read a lot of YA fiction, But I kind of forgot that this is YA. It's so incredibly dense when it comes to the politics that it's exploring, both in terms of the trans identity and the trans experience, but also in terms of class warfare. My God, this is good. Next up is Managing and Other Lies by... Oh, it's me. Yes, of course I put my own book on this list. It's my channel, it's my book, and it's really good. Managing and Other Lies is a collection of 6 horror stories. The final story in the collection isn't actually queer, but the other 5 are very explicitly about the trans experience. The first story is more of a novella, the titular Managing. It's presented as a series of diary entries about a young anonymous person who has taken on a job as a caretaker for an abandoned big house at the edge of an English country village. While living in this house and keeping a diary, they meet people who maybe live there, shouldn't be living there, who don't explain who and what they are. The first is a middle-aged man who keeps stepping on our protagonist's toes by doing the gardening and then making a bigger mess in the house. This middle-aged man undermines our protagonist, uses misogynistic and patriarchal language to make our protagonist feel small and scared and stressed and confused. Later in the story, our protagonist is wandering around upstairs with a bottle of wine, and they meet an older woman, a woman who maybe lives up there. And this woman is a seductress. She is vampire coded. And over the course of the story, she presents our protagonist with choices. Give up a piece of yourself, literally a piece of your body, something small or maybe something larger. And as you give up pieces of yourself, life will be made easier somehow. Some gift will be given to you. Something will help you. The story is incredibly Kafkaesque. That was one of the big influences that I had when I was writing it. And it's also a story of fitting in, a story of heteronormativity versus transphobia. It's a story that asks us, what do we have to give in order to just be alive? Another story in here is about a trans teenage girl who has run away from home and she's hitchhiking trying to make it to London. She's picked up by a middle-aged woman who seems super friendly. She is a feminist. She's got the suffragette flag stuck on her windscreen. And unfortunately, that is a bit of a red flag. I can't really tell you much about this story without spoiling things, but it only gets darker and more stressful as it goes on. That story is written in more traditional prose, but I also have another story in here that is written as a play script. Occasionally throughout the script, there are scrawlings and opinions left by the director of the play who fundamentally misunderstands its themes. And the story of the play itself is that of a young trans woman who has fully transitioned, she has a girlfriend, she has a good life, everything's fine, but the only person she hasn't really come out to and talked about her transition with is her mother. So most of the play takes place over a weekend visit to see her mother. Her mother is cruel and patronizing. Her mother ignores who she really is. And all the while, the ghost of a naked man is haunting her mother's house, and her mother can't see it. That's all I'll tell you. I'm very proud of this, and I'm continuing to write more horror stories in the future. You can click a link in the description and buy a copy of this right now. Thank you. Felix Ever After is a beautiful young adult drama by transmasculine American author Kaysen Callender. It tells the story of Felix, a young trans man who lives in Brooklyn with his father. His mother abandoned them, and Felix's dad has always tried his best to support him, mostly financially, giving him the money that he needs in order to study what he wants and go where he wants, that kind of thing. But he often fails to call Felix by his name and remember the correct pronouns, that kind of thing. And speaking as someone who has been in that exact position, being respected by your family means so much more than a little bit of financial aid. You start to wonder if they're paying for permission to be ignorant. But that's only a small part of what the book is about. Mostly, it is a pretty exciting kind of romantic drama. See, one day, Felix is in class, and he's about to unveil a kind of art project. But when he does so, the art project has been tampered with, and what we see are pre-transition photos and images of Felix's dead name, etc. Someone pulled a very cruel prank on him, and Felix is very sure he knows who did it. It's a boy in his class that he cannot stand, a boy that he has hated for the longest time, and so to get revenge, Felix decides to catfish this kid. He sets up a social media profile, pretends to be somebody else, and starts chatting with this other kid. And he has this whole plan for revenge, but as he does so, the two of them get talking. This kid opens up to Felix without knowing it's Felix, and their relationship starts to change and get more confusing. Meanwhile, Felix has a best friend. I actually won't go into it anymore because you really should experience all this drama for yourself. Felix Ever After is such a beautiful story. It is a roller coaster ride of emotions that lands on hope and positivity. But there's a long journey to get there. I really love this book. And here we have another horror novel, but I need to be honest with you. There aren't any explicitly trans themes or elements to this book, and so I had no idea that the author actually was trans. This is more of a straight up feminist horror story. And it was weeks after reading it that I found out from someone else that Samantha Allen is trans. But either way, this is an incredible work of horror fiction by a trans author. This is Patricia Wants to Cuddle. Incidentally, one of my favorite titles for any book I have ever read. It encourages so many questions from the audience. Who is Patricia? Why does she want to cuddle? Who does she want to cuddle? And is that a good or a bad thing, and why? I had so many questions when I saw this title, and oh my goodness, this is great. On the surface, it's kind of a satire of reality TV, but it gets even deeper and more interesting as it goes on. But the setup is, there is a TV show like The Bachelor, which I've never seen. And our protagonist is one of the girls on this show. They've done a few episodes, and this latest episode is being filmed on an island off the coast of Washington State. It's rainy, it's dark, and there's something strange on the island. Something dangerous. Something called Patricia. So this is a slasher novel. As they explore the island, as they continue to try to film, and you get different perspectives from the cast and crew, the bodies start to pile up. Whatever Patricia is coming for people. But why? And what is Patricia? And what do you mean she wants to cuddle? I love horror for a lot of different reasons, and I love a lot of different subgenres of horror. But I always have a soft spot for slashers, because slashers aren't really that dark. They don't have brooding and sad themes. Slashers are fun and exciting thrill rides. And you get that here. This book is plenty of gory fun. It's a slasher, but it does have some fantastic feminist themes as well. And I had so much fun reading it that I could pick this up any day and have a good time with it. Now, I really didn't want to just talk about fiction and novels in this video, especially when I am a trans poet who spends a lot of time at open mic nights with other great trans poets. There is so much good poetry out there by trans writers. And one of those incredible trans writers is Scottish poet Harry Josephine Giles. Josie Giles has written a few different poetry collections, but if the name rings a bell, it's probably because of this, Deep Wheel Arcadia. And this book is a lot of things. It is a work of narrative science fiction. It's written in the Orkney dialect because Josie Giles is from the Orkney Islands of Scotland. And it's also an epic poem. So if you imagine Homer's Odyssey, but make it science fiction, make it Scottish, make it written in a specific dialect, and also make it trans, you get this. And I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that this won the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is an absolutely monumental achievement. But we're not actually here to talk about this. We're here to talk about them. This is Josie Giles's newest poetry collection. And I went to the launch event for this in Glasgow a few months ago, and in her interview with Heather Parry, she talked about how this collection is for trans people. All the poems in here are very much written for a trans audience, while other poems and collections that she's put out in the past are more for a general audience with trans themes. And I love that. Tori Peters, who I've already talked about in this video, also primarily writes for a trans audience. If other people read it, that's great, because they get to understand our community and our experiences. But everything doesn't have to be for everyone. And some people get upset about that, and they're just screaming at nothing. These poems are very much from Josie's trans heart. And I actually asked her a question about this because in her collection, there is a strong overlap between the trans experience and nature writing. She does a lot of beautiful nature poetry, watching eagles fly around mountaintops and writing about it. And I asked her, what is that kind of crossroads between the trans experience and nature writing? And she talked about how not only is being trans natural, but nature is ugly and monstrous and scary and strange and confusing and wonderfully odd. She talked about different kinds of fish and birds who have weird biologies and habits and mating rituals and blah blah blah. Gender in the animal kingdom is a weird thing, and it's something to be explored and celebrated. And that's the overlap. And I found it so interesting to listen to her talk about all of that stuff. Them is really powerful. But it's also weird. Like, a lot of these are like scribbles and written upside down. The editing must have been a nightmare. So much weird formatting here. Look at this. Look at that. What is that? What's going on? So weird, but so great. Nobody thinks or writes like she does. Next is the only fantasy novel on this list, Felix, Extravagant by transmasculine author Yoon-Ha Lee. This is another book that isn't explicitly trans, but our protagonist in this book is non-binary. Instead, this book is very much an allegory for the experience of the Korean peninsula during the Japanese occupation in the decades leading up to World War II. Our protagonist lives in a land that is currently being occupied by a neighboring army. That army got a lot of their power and technology from a Western nation. Sound familiar? And what's so fun about this book is that it's pretty short, it's a standalone book. Both of those things are unusual for fantasy. But what's even more fun as a fantasy story is that our protagonist isn't a soldier or a prince. They are a painter, and they are given a unique job opportunity by the occupying army to use their painting skills to paint glyphs and symbols on mechanical dragons, imbuing them with souls and waking them up in order for them to be used as weapons of war and oppression. At least I think I'm getting all those details right. It's been a while since I've read it, and it's quite complex. Like, it's a simple story, but the details, the minutiae, it's subtle, it's very political, it's very historically dense, and it is absolutely wonderful. Felix Extravagant is one of those fantasy novels that fantasy fans probably haven't read. It kind of flew under the radar. Maybe because it's too different from what a lot of fantasy fans tend to read. It's inspired by Korean history. It's got a non-binary protagonist. It's not 800 pages long, and it's not the first in a 10-book series. Those are all things that fantasy fans typically love. But as a fantasy fan who really appreciates a brief book full of power and political intrigue and clever themes and a queer protagonist, all as a standalone story, yeah, I couldn't really ask for more. And I urge you, if you love fantasy fiction and you've never read this and you want to read something by a trans author, check out Felix Extravagant. This is a thriller, and it's a thriller that you might be more familiar with as an online publication. This is Welcome to Dolly Hall by Alison Greaves. Dolly Hall is a massive ongoing saga that Alison started writing on AO3 and now publishes on her Patreon. But a little while ago, it was picked up by an indie publisher, and it's coming out physically in a series of books. A little while ago, Alison was doing a tour of the UK, and when she got to Scotland, I was invited to be her talking partner to talk about trans horror and thriller fiction, which was so amazing. But what's it about? Well, Dolly Hall is pretty unique. It's set in a small English town, and our protagonist is a teenage boy. He has his sights set on a local university, and one day an older boy that he looks up to goes off to that university and promptly vanishes. After months go by, our protagonist runs into a girl who looks like a feminine version of that older boy. And so, a conspiracy starts to emerge in our protagonist's brain. See, our protagonist then reveals to us that he's actually a closeted trans girl. He knows that's true about himself, but he's not ready to transition yet. He's not ready to start going by she, her pronouns and medically transition, etc. And after he realizes that boys often go to this university and end up going missing if they live in Dolly Hall, he wonders if all the boys that go there are actually all closeted trans girls, and Dolly Hall has some sort of secret society set up to help young trans girls transition, given all of the red tape and gatekeeping and difficulties of transitioning in the UK. And so our protagonist wants to get into Dolly Hall so that he can be helped. He can be taken into their secret group and given the hormones and the support that he needs. Turns out, he's wrong. That's not what Dolly Hall is. It's more complicated than that, and I'm not going to spoil it. Read the book. This penultimate book, I haven't actually read yet. This is All the Hearts You Eat by Hailey Piper. I only just picked this up, but I have read Hailey Piper before. In fact, the thing that I read before was Queen of Teeth, a story that had such an enormous impact on me that it actually inspired one of the stories in my book. Queen of Teeth is revolting. It's about a woman who... Okay, I can't... I can't talk about what it's about on this channel. There is no way I can actually say out loud what happens to her. YouTube will not react kindly to it. But the themes of that story are about government interference. It's about conspiracies of medical organizations and their ties to the government and how that relates to the bodies of women and queer people. And all of those themes I injected into one of my stories as well, because they're so important and so frightening, and they make for very good fodder for a good trans horror story. So I massively recommend Queen of Teeth, but it is a lot. It is full of body horror. It is absolutely revolting, but then so are a lot of my stories. And when it comes to All the Hearts You Eat, Delilah S. Dawson, author of Bloom, a fantastic sapphic horror story, said this: "Sharp but tender, delicate but bloody, tragic but triumphant, all the hearts you eat will curl cat claws into your chest and take hold of your heart. This is Stephen King's It for a new generation." Now, Stephen King's It is notorious for having one of the most disgustingly depraved and awful endings of any book ever. But if I put that ending aside, It is one of my favorite novels. Something I love about it is the 80s vibe, but the main thing I love is the camaraderie. It is about a group of outcast kids fighting a big, scary, strange monster and confronting fears that represent puberty and growth and change and all of the scary things that kids go through. I love that book. And if this is a queer, trans, modern version of It, well, I know I'm gonna have a good time with it. So I'll be reading this soon. Now, I left this one till last for a very specific reason that I'll get to in a sec. This is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. A lot of you have probably heard of this book. It was a really big deal when it came out, and for good reason. This is one of the most effective, powerful, thematically deep, and honestly unforgettable horror stories I have ever read in my life, and a lot of people had that same reaction. Alison was so young when she wrote this. This is a Shirley Jackson-esque haunted house story. It's very much a story about the rotten heart at the center of English culture and politics, and it's very specifically about how all of that affects trans people today. It's the story of two people who were friends at university, but now in their 20s, one of them is a trans woman who is literally being haunted by ghosts, and the other became a TERF, and she is campaigning against trans rights. How did that happen? Well, while they were at uni together, they spent the night in a haunted house called Albion. Get it? And something terrible happened that night. They also went in there with a third friend that they don't talk about. What the hell happened that night in Albion? Well, the whole book is leading up to it, so you have to read it to find out, but the political messaging in here is absolutely astonishing. This is one of the greatest horror novels ever written. I'm not joking. This is an absolute masterpiece of haunted house horror fiction. However, I left it till last because Alison doesn't like me. I don't know why, and I've never ever talked about this on this channel. She doesn't like me, and I have no idea why. But that does not change the fact that she is a massive inspiration. She is one of the great horror fiction writers in the world right now, and she's also one of the most important trans writers working today, putting out such incredibly politically savvy books as this and Brainworms. She is a visionary writer, someone I am so inspired by, and someone who I'm pretty sure absolutely hates me. God knows why. Anyway, read this. It's incredible. That was a lot, but it was a lot because there is so much great fiction out there by trans people. And not just fiction, poetry, non-fiction, memoirs. Dig around. There is a huge world of great fiction by amazing trans writers, pushing boundaries of genre, especially when it comes to horror, and I am so grateful to my trans community for being some of the best artists working today. We are all struggling right now in the face of an adversity that just was invented. 0.5% of this country's population are trans. We are the perfect scapegoats to focus the attention of rich and powerful people, and thus the attention of everyone else who is so, for some reason, easily manipulated into hating whoever they're told to hate. And all the while, we make really good art in the face of all of it. I'm going to keep writing good trans poetry and stories, and you can read all of those when I publish them on my Patreon. Poems go up for $3 and up patrons, stories go up for $5 and up patrons, or if you can just give $1 a month, you can join a private Discord server, and I also publish exclusive essays for $1 patrons as well. Support trans artists, read trans stories, and join trans Patreons. Thank you. Subscribe for books.